We're the biggest small town on the planet, and we're always trying to expand it. We like to strut what we got in a land of holy Mackinac.
Welcome to Flashbacks, the show about local history and nostalgia. We'll take you on tours of neat places and show you things you've never seen. You'll meet some amazing people, and each program will feature an original song about Hamilton.
Welcome to the second episode of Flashbacks. My name is Mark McNeil, and this is my co-host, Margaret Houghton. Today we thought we'd go to the dogs. We're at the Corporal Nathan Cirillo Off-Leash Park in Ancaster. It's heaven on earth for dogs. They bark, they can run, and they got acres and acres to do it. It's also an example of a park that's perfectly named. Corporal Nathan Cirillo, who we all know was tragically killed a year ago, was a lover of dogs. He had two big ones, and he used to love to bring them here. So it made all the sense in the world to name this park after him. However, with some other parks in the city, sometimes the name is a bit of a mystery.
Yes, there are some parks and streets and other areas in town that are named after people that are completely forgotten nowadays. If you tell people the name of the park, they'll look at you and say, "Who is that?" They don't remember at all.
For example, this park on the escarpment is named after Sam Lawrence. But a lot of people in Hamilton, especially younger people, have no idea who Sam Lawrence is. It's something that's true of a lot of parks in Hamilton. The ribbon gets cut, decades go by, and they have no idea who the person is. So who was Sam Lawrence, Margaret?
Sam Lawrence was a trade unionist. He came to Canada in 1912 and got into politics in 1934. He served on Board of Control, he was an MLA, and then in 1944 he became Hamilton's first Labour mayor. And 1944, coincidentally, was also the time that this quarry was deeded to the city to become a park. He served as mayor until 1949 and then got back into Board of Control. He died in 1959, and this park was named after him in 1960.
Sometimes people make the mistake of calling this St. Lawrence Park, to which a letter to the editor once said, "Sam Lawrence was a lot of things, but a saint wasn't one of them." That's just one confusion when it comes to names. Other times the name can be a complete head scratcher. What on earth is a Terryberry? A Kool-Aid drink? A stuffed animal? Actually, it's a name of a pioneer family in Hamilton. I'd like you to meet Wayne Terryberry. Tell us about the Terryberry family.
Well, the Terryberry's an anglicized German name. We came over to North America about 1735, and it was Durenberger with a D. And it got anglicized, German-speaking immigrant, probably an English-speaking immigration officer, so to speak. And it got anglicized to Derryberry and Terryberry for that reason. And we moved up into Canada about 1810. My great-great-uncle and great-great-grandfather moved to Hamilton about that period of time.
And how on earth did it end up becoming the name of the library?
Well, when we settled in Hamilton, you got to remember there was no really any city here, and this was all farmland up in the mountain. And my great-great-great-uncle William Terryberry established an inn right here, right across the street from the library, called the Terryberry Tavern, or the Terryberry Inn. And my great-great-uncle, also his family started a mill just down the street. So you got to remember, these are Indian trails, the Mohawk Path, and James Street was the Indian Trail to the Grand River. So this was a hustly, bustly little spot with pioneers coming in to visit, to get their mail, to have socials, to have people stay over. The stagecoach would stop here, and people would come and get their lumber milled, their grain milled as well. So old maps from 1815 show that this was a village called Terryberry. So back when the library was created and established in 1970, the story I heard was that they asked a grade 2 reading class three pioneer family names to name the library after. And the roar went up in the class, Terryberry Library, as a kind of had a ring to it, I guess.
Well, it certainly does have a ring to it. And the Terryberry Library, next time somebody asks you where that name came from, you can tell them. Sometimes a name is staring you right in the face and you have absolutely no idea who the person is. We're at Gage Park in front of the George Robinson Bandshell. How many tens of thousands of people over the years have watched concerts here, looked up and had absolutely no idea who George Robinson is? Well, we happen to have the great-granddaughter of George Robinson, Brenda Robinson, with us.
Hi, Mark.
Who is George Robinson?
He's my great-grandfather, and he was the 13th Battalion Bandmaster for the RHLI, the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, for many decades.
And I understand you made a bit of a discovery recently relating to him. Why don't you show that to us?
I did. This is part of his sheet. This is some of his sheet music. He wrote for the Leander Rowing Club here in Hamilton. It's called the Leander Waltz. He wrote this in 1923, and this is just a bit of the sheet music here. So it was a great find to find this of my family history.
And I guess what was really interesting about that was that he was not known as a composer. He was known as a musician and a band leader. And a lot of people that have studied him were not aware of this aspect of his musicianship. How did you come to know about George Robinson as you were growing up in your family?
My family's been very involved with the RHLI for many years. There was 5 generations of my family involved with the RHLI. So I grew up with the RHLI and at the armories.
And he was always seen as, someone described him once as the sort of rock star of his era.
Yes.
And why was that?
He was a phenomenal musician for his time, and the band actually was not doing too great when my grandfather stepped in, and he brought the band back and made it a big thing.
So there you have it. George Robinson Bandshell. Next time you're at Gage Park watching a concert, you can whisper to the person next to you who that George Robinson is. One thing you might notice about names in Hamilton is at times we have a tendency to enlarge the truth. For instance, we don't call it Hamilton Hill, we call it Hamilton Mountain. We don't call it Cootes Park, we call it Cootes Paradise. We don't call it Dundurn Estate, we call it Dundurn Castle. Anyway, have a listen.
We live in a town, thinks it has a mountain. It's just a hill, really nothing astounding. That's the way we talk in Hamilton, prone to a little exaggeration. We're the biggest small town on the planet. We're always trying to expand it. We like to strut what we got in the land of holy Mackinac. We got a place called Cootes Paradise. Don't know why, but I guess it's kinda nice. It's got frogs, turtles and bugs. Bring some boots, 'cause there's a lot of muck in the biggest small town on the planet. We're always trying to expand it. We like to strut what we got in the land of holy Mackinac. We got a place called Dundurn Castle. It's just a big house with a name that baffles. Got no drawbridge, walk right in. Have some tea before the tour begins. We're the biggest small town on the planet. We're always trying to expand it. We like to strut what we got in a land of holy Mackinac. We got an airport with hardly any flights, except for cargo in the middle of the night. But we got a bomber and an English crew. Could blow up Tirana if we wanted to. We're the biggest small town on the planet. We're always trying to expand it. We like to strut what we got in a land of holy Mackinac. Land of holy Mackinac. Mackinac. Tiger cats eat them raw.
If you find this kind of thing interesting, go to thespec.com. There's a quiz to test your knowledge about Hamilton names, and there's also a nifty section called Namesakes. It's a point-and-click map, and you could find out about streets, about buildings, neighborhoods, and also Margaret wrote a book called Hamilton Street Names. Tell us a little bit about the book, Margaret.
Well, Hamilton Street Names is a listing of different streets from all around Hamilton, including the outlying areas, Ancaster, Dundas, Stony Creek, defining why streets are called what they are called, when they were named, and in many cases, other interesting facts about the people they're named after.
But maybe it makes more sense to go out on the streets ourselves. We're standing at King and James in the corner of Gore Park here. And we thought we'd take a little bit of a tour, Margaret and I. Margaret's my favorite tour guide when it comes to all things Hamilton. Looking just around today, we have James Street going down here. We got King Street going here, Jackson Square. Margaret, tell us, how did it ever come to be called James Street? Why not Jim Street or Jamie Street?
Well, it was originally called Jarvis Street, which was George Hamilton's wife's maiden name. And then when Nathaniel Hewson bought the property, he renamed the street James after his son, who was a road builder. So it became James Street back in the 1820s.
And of course we got King Street. Which king are we remembering with King Street?
Well, when George Hamilton was naming the streets, he thought he would name King Street after the current King of England, who was King George IV. And King George IV was one of the more notorious kings. He was quite a playboy, and when he finally got married, he saw his bride for the first day on their wedding day. 9 months later, they had their one and only child.
Oh. And Gore Park, who was the Gore that's being remembered here?
Actually, Gore Park is not named after a person. When they first set up the park, it was a triangular piece of land that was donated by George Hamilton, and Nathaniel Hewson was supposed to donate an equally triangular piece to make a square in the center of Hamilton, but he reneged on it. So we have this triangular piece of land in the middle of the city, and a triangular piece of land is called a gore. So in the early days, before it was called a park, it was called the Gore in King Street, because it was a triangular piece from the width here and narrowing down to a point near the end before the extension.
Let's talk about some of the buildings in the area. The Piggott Building is one of the more impressive buildings in Hamilton. Well, why is it named Piggott?
Well, it was named Piggott after the construction company that built it, Piggott Construction. This was Hamilton's first skyscraper. It's 210 feet tall. It was very tall for its time when it was constructed in 1929. And it was office buildings for years and years and years. It's a designated heritage building and now houses condominiums.
And architecture changed considerably when it came to building the Jackson Square. And of course, that's named after a former mayor, Lloyd Jackson. But why was it that they saw fit to name this project after that mayor as opposed to a different mayor?
Well, Lloyd Jackson was the mayor during the 1950s, which is when the urban renewal started. And they decided they were going to create a mall in the center of Hamilton. So they knocked down everything in that area. It's quite a large area. And they built Jackson Square. And of course, Lloyd D. Jackson was defeated in 1962. So as they were constructing it, they decided that the best possible person to name it after would be Lloyd D. Jackson.
We're standing in front of the McNabb Transit Terminal, remembering McNabb, a person from Hamilton's history who probably didn't ride a lot of buses. Who was McNabb?
Alan Napier McNabb was a lawyer. He was the boy hero of the War of 1812, and he settled in Hamilton after his first wife died in 1826. And he bought up a lot of land. He was an entrepreneur. Of course, he built Dundurn Castle, which is his lasting memorial. And one of the things amongst many that are named after Sir Alan McNabb was the street, McNabb Street, which is south here and north on the other side.
Well, it does appear, though, that a section of it is named after someone else, someone named Franz Liszt. I didn't realize Liszt was from Hamilton.
Oh, Franz Liszt was not from Hamilton. Franz Liszt was the bad boy of composers in Europe. Wow. And what happened in 1994, the American Liszt Society, in collaboration with the City of Hamilton and McMaster University and Dr. George Walker, who is the expert on Franz Liszt, brought the Great Romantics to Hamilton as a festival. And they had it for many, many years, celebrating particularly Franz Liszt. So it was decided to commemorate that by naming a portion of McNabb Street South between King and Hunter, Franz Liszt Avenue.
Then there's the Robert Thompson building. Margaret, who was Robert Thompson?
Robert Thompson was an employee of the Standard Life Assurance Company. He started as a cashier in 1919, ended up as head of the company. He was also the one that promoted the partnership with Yale Properties when they created Jackson Square. And when the second phase of Jackson Square opened in 1977, they named the building after him.
So then, of course, there's the Ellen Fairclough building, named after a very famous Hamiltonian. Tell us a little bit about Ellen Fairclough, Margaret.
Well, Ellen Fairclough was an accountant in Hamilton, and she decided to go into municipal politics and was elected in 1946 as an alderman. Then she was elected as a controller in 50, but in 1950 she also ran for federal politics and became an MP. She also became the first female cabinet minister in 1957 when she was created the Secretary of State for Canada under Diefenbaker's government.
Interesting, though, the building that we remember her with is actually a provincial government building.
It is a provincial government building. It is also one of the few buildings in Hamilton that actually names the 13th floor.
In between the Art Gallery of Hamilton and Hamilton Place is a street called Summers Lane. Why would they call it summer? Were they imagining warmer days than today?
No, actually the Summers family had a repertory company. They performed theater in Hamilton. They had the Summers Mountain Theater from about 1900 to 1914 when unfortunately the theater burned to the ground. So after they built Hamilton Place, they wanted a name that represented theater in Hamilton. And Hazel Compass, who was their daughter, proposed that they name it Summers Lane, and it was called Summers Lane and has been called that ever since. Well, here we are at the corner of Bay and King Streets.
And a new restaurant I see here is open up called the George Hamilton Restaurant. And it kind of begs the question, who was Hamilton? I thought maybe this gentleman might be able to help us.
Hi, I'm David Ricketts, and I'm the third great-grandson of George Hamilton. And George Hamilton came to this city, not then a city, but he came here in 1815, and he bought a lot of acres and divided them up into lots to sell. And because of that, he took the name and gave Hamilton its name.
And how did it come about that it was named after him or other people that might have been involved in the time?
Well, as I said, because he bought the property and decided that he would end up calling it Hamilton.
What was he like, George Hamilton? Do you have any idea what kind of person he was?
He was raised in a very nice family, a Scottish family. He went to Scotland to get his schooling and what have you, and came back, fought in the War of 1812, at the Battle of Detroit, Queenston Height, Lundy's Lane. He was a good family man, married Jarvis, William Jarvis is one of his daughters, and they had a son, Robert Jarvis Hamilton. And he was afraid that being close to the border down in Queenston was going to be a problem. So he moved up here and bought Durand's property and in 1815.
And the rest is history, so to speak. So what did he look like?
Who knows?
Well, are there any pictures?
There's no known portrait of him.
I guess it was before photography, and I guess he never stood in front of a painter to have his portrait done. Well then, who's this guy?
I don't know.
Well, maybe we haven't had Margaret's with us here. Maybe Margaret can shed some light on the silhouette that's up there and whether it is actually George Hamilton.
Well, that silhouette was donated to the Hamilton Public Library a number of years ago by a family that had been down in Queenston at the same time as the Hamilton family. And on the back of it, it says George Hamilton, founder of the city of Hamilton. So we say it's purportedly a silhouette of George Hamilton. There's no way to tell for sure. It's the only image I've ever seen that could even be considered. But again, there's no way to tell for sure. It could be him, it could be someone else.
Now, I understand at some point a photo surfaced that purported to be George Hamilton.
Oh, that was for the centennial of 1913, or the fake centennial. And they published a book. They put a picture in of a gentleman with a top hat and a beard and a cane and said this was George Hamilton. The only problem was it was a much later photograph from probably about the 1870s. George Hamilton died in 1836, and the first photographer showed up in Hamilton in 1842. So it's no way is it a photograph of George Hamilton.
How long would that myth have carried on, do you suppose?
Over 50 years.
Over 50 years.
I think it's still going on.
Well, some people still maintain that it is George Hamilton, and every time it shows up, a couple of people go, "Excuse me, that's not George Hamilton."
So for our viewers, you might want to keep it in mind. If anybody ever approaches you and says they have a picture of George Hamilton, they're fooling you. Today we looked at some interesting names on signs in Hamilton. Everything from George Hamilton, the guy for whom Hamilton is named, to Nathan Cirillo, the Nathan Cirillo dog park up on the mountain. If you're interested in this kind of thing, go to thespec.com. You'll find a quiz. We can test your knowledge on Hamilton names. And there's also another item, a point-and-click map that you can go to buildings and parks and streets and find out the story behind the name. But we got one other for you, the Bayfront Park. We're standing in front of Bayfront Park here, and it has an interesting story behind its name. Margaret, how did this park come about?
Well, this park wasn't originally a park. It was part of the harbor. It was water. And they started infilling it in the 1850s for the railroad. And then eventually, as the 20th century came along, they started doing infill. So they would dig, infill. And the Lax brothers started really infilling in the 60s, and eventually the land was transferred to the city, and it was quite toxic, so they had to do a remediation. They also had to come up with a name for it, so they called it Harbourfront Park.
Which was problematic, because in Toronto they also have a Harbourfront Park, and they picked it first. So the city then decided to come up with a new name. So they approached the Spectator and asked readers to put in ideas for a new name for the park. And they appointed 3 judges. I was one of the judges. Colin Miller, a former police chief, was one as well, and a representative of the city. And hundreds of suggestions came in. There was everything from Puds Point to Macassa Park, you name it. We ended up locking ourselves in a room, the 3 judges, and we had to decide between all these suggestions. So after hours of back and forth and not coming to any kind of agreement, I finally looked over at the other 2 judges and I said, look, I think we're trying to be too clever. I think we're trying too hard. We need something simple here. Why don't we just call it Bayfront? They've got a bay in the back, we got Bay Street on the front. It's perfect. The other 2 judges looked at me and said, yeah, let's go with it. So the next thing was to take it to City Council, and there were a couple of councillors who thought that it was not clever enough. But in the end, City Council went for it, and now you see, it's called Bayfront Park. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's show. Next month we're going to look at newspapers. 2016 is the 170th anniversary of the Hamilton Spectator, and a lot of people in Hamilton would probably be surprised to know that there were a lot of newspapers over the years, and Margaret and I, we're going to look at some of those newspapers and take a tour of the Spectator. So until next time, bye for now.